The final Republican tax bill passed and was signed into law by Donald Trump about 2 weeks ago. So for my first video, I wanted to give my reflections on the law, mostly from a different, much larger perspective than what most analysts and commentators have been doing, as well as give my thoughts on a video that surfaced a couple weeks ago of Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown and Republican Senator Orin getting into a very heated exchange during a Senate Finance Committee hearing over the new Republican tax plan. So here's the video.
And I just think it would be nice just tonight, before we go home, to just acknowledge, well, this tax cut really is not for the middle class, it's for the rich. And that whole thing about higher wages, well, it's a good selling point. But we know companies don't just give away higher wages. They just don't give away higher wages just because they have more money. Corporations are sitting on a lot of money now. They're sitting on a lot of profits now.
Can I ask you all a quick question? If the tax reform bill goes through, do you plan to increase investment, your company's investment, capital investment? Just a show of hands, the tax reform goes through? Okay.
Why aren't the other hands up?
Why aren't the other hands up?
John, I've got a question for
I'm going to just say to you that I come from the poor people. And I've been here working my whole stinking career for people who don't have a chance. And I really resent anybody saying that I'm just doing this for the rich. Give me a break. I think you guys overplay that all the time, and it gets old. And frankly, you ought to quit it.
Mr. Chairman, the public
Wait a
believes
minute,
it.
I'm not through. I get kind of sick and tired of it. True, it's a nice political play.
Well, Mr.
But it's
Chairman,
not true.
with all due respect, I get sick and tired of the richest people
Regular
in this
order,
country
Mr. Chairman.
getting richer and
Regular
richer
order.
and richer.
Order.
Regular middle. We do a tax cut
Regular
for the
order.
rich and middle class
Wait a minute,
shrinks.
Regular
Over
order.
and over and over again.
Wait just
How
a
many
second.
times do we do this before we learn this, Mr. Chairman?
Listen, I've honored you by allowing you to spout off here. And what you said was not right. That's all I'm saying. I come from the lower middle class originally. We didn't have anything. So don't spew that stuff on me. I get a little tired of that crap. And let me just say something. If we worked together, we could pull this country out of every mess it's in. And we could do a lot of the things that you're talking about, too. And I think I've got a reputation of having worked together with Democrats.
Let's start with Chip.
Not starting with Chip. I did it. I've done it for years. I've got more bills.
Start with Chip
I
today.
got more bills passed than everybody on this committee put together. And they've been passed for the benefit of people in this country. Now, all I can say is I like you personally very much, but I'm telling you, this bull crap that you guys throw out here really gets old after a while. To do it right at the end of this was just not right. And it takes a lot to get me worked up like this.
Call the roll.
Let me call the roll on the, what are we on?
The Menendez Amendment.
On the Menendez Amendment, let's call the roll.
Sherrod Brown is 100% correct here. The entire purpose of this law is to give tax cuts to the rich. So Orin can clutch his pearls all he wants, but we all know it's true. He says he's tired of these type of attacks from Democrats. Well, guess what, Orin? The American people are tired too. They're tired of your attacks on them and their economic and financial well-being. They are sick of senators who claim to be from and for the middle class, all the while they pass tax bills written by corporate lobbyists and special interests for the benefit of multinational corporations and American oligarchs. So if it's true that Orin is from the lower middle class, he's either an idiot or a traitor to the people he grew up with and those that raised him. And it's not like it's difficult or hard to understand why this law isn't for the middle class. All you have to do is take a macro level look at the current tax system along with key portions of the Republican tax law, and you'll figure it out real quick. So let's do that. Instead of arguing the finer details of every single provision of the law, let's look at a macro view of the American tax system and see if Orrin Hatch and his Republican cronies are hurting or helping. First of all, because the United States is a federation, Americans are taxed at 3 different levels of government. They are taxed by the federal government, state governments, and local or municipal governments. At each of these levels, the government's responsibilities are different, as is the means with which they tax citizens. So let's first look at the federal government. The main way in which the federal government raises revenue is through a tax on income, meaning when an individual earns an income, the federal government will take a piece of that income through what is called the individual income tax. It does the same thing to corporations through the corporate income tax. Currently, the U.S. government raises approximately half of its total yearly revenue through an income tax. This tax is a progressive tax, meaning the higher an individual's income, the higher the percentage of their income they'll pay. In other words, one pays according to their ability to pay. So again, this is a progressive tax. It favors the middle class and the poor, and is the only progressive tax Americans pay at any level of government. All other taxes are slanted in favor of the rich, and even more so the super rich. The second largest amount of revenue to the federal government, nearly as much as the personal income tax, is the payroll tax, which is the money taken out of an individual's paycheck for things like Social Security and Medicare. The payroll tax is a flat rate, meaning that up to approximately $120,000, individuals are taxed at the same flat rate or percentage of their income, making no attempt to discriminate over one's ability to pay, and any income over that $120,000 isn't taxed at all. This means high income earners get taxed on the first $120,000 like everyone else, but anything over that, they pay 0% in payroll tax. Now, as you can tell, this tax is very much a regressive tax, meaning the tax rate decreases as the income of an individual increases. The tax burden is reduced on individuals with higher ability to pay and shifted onto those with a lower ability to pay. Think about it this way. For the 2016-2017 season, NBA superstar LeBron James made approximately $31 million. There are 82 games in an NBA season, therefore he made close to $380,000 per game, which means in just over 15 minutes of the first game of the season, LeBron James paid all the payroll tax he'll pay for that year on his income. The rest of his $30 million won't be touched. Now compare that to someone making $120,000 a year, which is still making a very good living. Well, every cent he or she earns will be payroll taxed. All 12 months of working, presumably 8 hours a day, compared to LeBron James's 15 minutes of basketball. Or how about someone making $31,000 a year, which was the median personal income of Americans in 2016? Well, once again, every single bit of this income is payroll taxed, all 12 months of work. Yet it would take this person, the average American, nearly 4 entire years to make what LeBron James made in just 15 minutes in the 2016-17 NBA basketball season. So given the fact that the federal payroll tax is such a highly regressive tax, targeting the lowest income earners in the country, and given that Orrin Hatch claims to be from the lower working class, and given the fact that Donald Trump and the Republican Party have claimed this tax reform helps the middle class, given all that, where is the provision in this law reforming the payroll tax in a way that makes it more egalitarian? Where is the provision in the Republican tax law that lifts the $120,000 cap so that the super rich like LeBron James pay more than just 15 minutes worth of their work? Oh yeah, that's right, it doesn't exist. And Orrin Hatch prefers to gaslight everyone for the sake of his wealthy buddies and his corporate donors. And the same goes for Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party, and most of the Democratic Party barring a handful of principled people. Now, the only other main revenue sources the federal government gets through taxation, both of which are fairly minuscule, is the excise tax, which is a tax on things like motor fuel, tobacco, and alcohol, and then the corporate income tax, which is a tax on the income or profits of corporations, which currently only makes up approximately 10% of total federal tax revenue. The corporate income tax used to be pretty high. In fact, back in 1952, the tax on corporations made up nearly 1/3 of all revenue to the federal government, while the payroll tax, as we have already seen being the most regressive federal tax, only made up 10% of federal revenue. Contrast that with today, where it's the exact opposite. The payroll tax, which again hits working class the hardest, makes up over a third of all federal revenue, while the tax on corporations makes up only 10%. So what does this mean? Well, this means that over the last 60 years, the tax burden that corporations and their wealthy owners paid to the federal government has been shifted onto the backs of average Americans or working class folks. So again, I say, given that Orrin Hatch claims to be from the lower working class, and given the fact that Donald Trump and the Republican Party have claimed this tax reform helps the middle class, given all that, where's the provision to reform the corporate income tax in order to shift the tax burden off the backs of average Americans and back onto corporations as it once was? That's right, it doesn't exist. Actually, the largest part of this Republican law does the exact opposite. It lowers the corporate tax rate instead. So instead of helping the middle class and releasing some of their tax burden, they plan on placing more burden on them by lowering the tax rate for corporations. So well done, Orin. As chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, you are such a mighty champion of the lower working class. Taxes to the federal government aren't the only taxes Americans pay. Americans also have to pay taxes to their state and local governments, because state and local governments provide services that the federal government does not. For example, it's state taxes that fund state universities and build and maintain roads. The federal government builds and maintains the interstates. However, all other roads and highways are the responsibility of the state. Likewise, local or municipal governments have responsibilities too. Many, if not most, public schools, fire and police departments, and emergency medical services are run by local or municipal governments. So let's look at how state and local governments get their revenue. Approximately 70% of the revenue state and local governments raise is through two types of taxes. One, the sales tax, meaning the amount of money that is added to a good or service when purchased. And two, the property tax, which is exactly what it sounds like, a tax on the value of an individual's property, things like land, houses, automobiles. So who do these taxes favor? Well, you guessed it, once again, they both favor the rich and wealthy. Why? Well, let's look at the sales tax. The sales tax favors the wealthy because it makes no effort to determine one's ability to pay like a progressive tax would. The sales tax is a flat rate or percentage added onto the price of a good or service being purchased, which is collected by the seller and sent to the government. It doesn't matter if you're LeBron James or a homeless man that lives on the corner. If you go into a store to purchase a cup of coffee, a new shirt, a roll of toilet paper, or whatever, both LeBron James and the homeless man will pay the exact same amount in tax to the state government. It really is amazing that we live in a society that would tax those at the lowest end of the socioeconomic scale the exact same as we would those at the top end. For that homeless man, or hell, for almost anybody, the percentage of tax added onto a roll of toilet paper, a cup of coffee, or one's weekly groceries is extremely significant in terms of one's income. Yet, to someone like LeBron James, it's trivial. Now finally, let's look at property taxes. The main way in which most local or municipal governments get their revenue that is mostly used to fund public schools, the local or city police and fire departments, is through something called a property tax. The property tax is a tax on the value of all the property a person owns. The county or city tax assessor will determine the value of one's home, car, land, or whatever property they own, and then they are required to pay a tax on that property. This is a flat tax, not progressive, meaning they once again make no attempt to make one's ability to pay count for anything. No, LeBron James pays the same percent of taxes on his property as every other poor schmuck in town. But that's not even the main way in which this tax favors the wealthy. The primary way in which this tax helps the rich is that it doesn't count certain things like stocks and bonds as property. In other words, you get taxed on the value of your land you own, or the house you live in, or the car you drive, but the value of the stocks and bonds you own aren't touched. So you could sell your house tomorrow for $100,000, of which you've been paying property taxes on for years, take that money and buy $100,000 worth of stocks and bonds, and not be property taxed a single cent. So why does this matter exactly? Well, it matters because the richest 10% of Americans own over 80% of all stocks, and the notorious 1% own nearly 40% of all stock shares. The vast amount of their wealth isn't in the homes they live in or the cars they drive. No, it's in the stocks and the bonds they own. Now compare that with the dismal fact that for most Americans, their wealth is in their homes, if they are even able to afford and maintain one. At every single age group, the net worth of an individual is largely determined by the equity in their house. So in other words, the single largest source of wealth most middle class and working class Americans have are their homes, which is consistently and constantly, year in and year out, taxed by the government. Yet the billions and billions of dollars of stocks and bonds, mostly owned by the richest people in society, is not touched by this tax. Sure, they have to pay a meager capital gains tax on any income generated by said stocks and bonds, just as someone who sells a piece of land or property has to pay taxes on the income gained then. They don't, however, have to pay a property tax. So once again I say, given that Orin Hatch claims to be from the lower working class, and given the fact that Donald Trump and the Republican Party have claimed this tax reform helps the middle class, given all that, where are the provisions in this law that help make state and local taxes more egalitarian? Where are the provisions reforming the sales tax? Where is the provision that will include stocks and bonds and the property tax? Something that could completely revolutionize the communities in which all Americans live. That's right, it doesn't exist, because this law was never meant to reform taxes for the mass of Americans. The bottom line is that this law was meant to be a handout to multinational corporations and the handful of American oligarchs that own and profit from them. Sure, next year and probably a few years after that, many middle-class Americans will see a slight drop in their taxes. However, these gains are temporary and mostly insignificant given the massive tax rewards this law gives to the very top income earners. Nearly 80% of the tax benefits of this law go to the top 1%. It's kind of like if a guard at a bank took $100 in ones and threw it all over the floor, and the dozens of bank customers all scrambled to the ground to collect, fight, and claw each other over the money. Meanwhile, in all the commotion, the bank guard and the bank manager opened the bank vault, allowed the richest man in town to stroll right in, take out as much cash as he wanted in wheelbarrows, and walk right out the back door. And because this huge handout to the rich blows such a massive hole in the federal deficit, Republicans have already started to plan their attack on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid next year in order to pay for it. This law is not even close to being a good deal for Americans, because if it was, 80% of the benefits would go to the working class, the middle class, not the 1%, and it would make the U.S. tax system more fair, with lasting structural changes to how the government, at every level, raises revenue. Instead, we got another law that is nothing more than a convoluted, trickle-down economic nightmare for the middle class, given to us by politicians that think this way about your average American.
I have a rough time wanting to spend billions and billions and trillions of dollars to help people who won't help themselves, won't lift a finger and expect the federal government to do everything.